Hey everyone, welcome to our members only live stream. For those just joining us, a reminder, you can become a member here at the Out of Body Travel Foundation, and boy, do we appreciate it when you do. You get a lot of perks for joining, but you are really helping us as a foundation to continue with our mission, which is to reduce spiritual hunger worldwide and to make it possible to continue keeping all of our books and films and DVDs and everything downloadable for free to everyone in the world, any continent, any little nook and cranny. And so we really appreciate it. So if you like what we're doing, feel free and please consider becoming a member. It's very much appreciated. You can start for as little as $1.99 a month, and you can go up to the $49.99 level per month, where you actually would receive a half an hour of spiritual counseling per month for that sponsorship here. So you take a look at the join button and look at the different hierarchies of angels. We have different levels of membership and the perks that are available for those. But most of all, if you support what we're doing and want to help us to keep doing it, consider becoming a member so that we can all, do this together. Sorry, I have to adjust this little camera over here a little. Okay. And so anyway, thank you so much for joining. We're going to talk a little bit about Gustavo's sickbed experience to heaven. I wanted to share just a couple of other little things before we go into Gustavo's experience. He is a member of the Aponte family, who we have been supporting in Venezuela for a couple of years, trying to help them out and keep them going under this regime that they're living in at this time. It's been difficult, but he had an excellent experience that we're going to talk about in a minute. Welcome, John. Welcome, Andrew. Thank you for joining us. So we're going to start with another member of ours shared with me a vision that they had about Psalm 14. So I'm just going to share Psalm 14 with you. And then I want to just also share a prayer I was given in a mystical experience called the Prayer for Our Times. And so we'll do that. So Psalm 14 was given to one of our mystics here. And so I felt like it was probably something relevant to share with everyone. So we'll go ahead and do that. It's called A Lament Over Widespread Corruption. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. Their deeds are loathsome and corrupt. Not one does what is good. The Lord looks down from heaven upon the children of men to see if even one is wise. If even one seeks God, all have gone astray. All alike are perverse. Not one does what is good, not even one. Will these evildoers never learn? They devour my people as they devour bread. They do not call upon the Lord. They have good reason then to fear. God is with the company of the just. They would crush the hopes of the poor, but the poor have the Lord as their refuge. Oh, that from Zion might come the salvation of Israel. Jacob would rejoice and Israel be glad when the Lord restores his people. So something to meditate on in these times. And then we'll add to it this little prayer that I was given as a prayer for our times. Do not let the tremblings of your chosen ones take, and allow every peace to come upon us in its stead. May their light be firm, their strongholds of the light. Empower them, Lord, with your spirit of love and might. May the soldiers of God rise and be strong in their unity. So just something to utilize at this time. And so let's go to Gustavo. who got very, very sick, and he had this experience on Valentine's Day. So he woke up. I had a very vivid dream that was incredibly beautiful. It ended up stirring up areas of my life that are worrisome or in conflict. I woke up the next day and got really sick, nausea, vomiting, cold sweating. It took me 2 days to sort of feel better. That relates to the dream in that I brought back with me an enlightened state that made me talk to my mom and my brother through a WhatsApp call about really transcendental stuff. All of this while I was really sick. In that dream, I made it to what seemed like heaven. I was aware that it was only a portion of it, but I felt completely at home there. I was surprised because in my conscious mind, I sort of believe I don't deserve entering heaven, but yet there I was. First, I encountered an area where souls were given the chance to have deeply meaningful romantic relationships with partners with whom things didn't work out while they were alive on Earth. Love in that dimension was so pure and so strongly related to the way kids love and the innocent ways they use to process reality. Then I was shown a different area where souls who weren't allowed in heaven hung out. They looked exactly like we did, but it was explained that we needed to help them cross to our side by helping them to realize mistakes they had made and why they had made them. If they completely understood, they were embraced and welcomed on the side we were on. I loved this because the concept of punishment was being replaced by understanding in order to gain redemption. Later on, while awake, I talked to my mother about 2 women I had met in the past who were in love with me back when I lived elsewhere, and how it was basically impossible for us to end up being together. Talking to her about all of this helped me to realize that I am capable of giving and deserving love, and that someday God might grant me the opportunity to enjoy that aspect of life, or maybe on a different plane of existence. Once I started feeling physically better, I realized all this had happened on Valentine's Day. So that is what Gustavo experienced just yesterday. So I thought we could talk about that. And also, just so everyone knows, we're also taking all your questions. So feel free to ask whatever you might want to talk about as well. So Gustavo's experience shows such a wonderful aspect of the afterlife that many people have a hard time embracing sometimes while on Earth, which is that all things are made new. All things come to wholeness. And so in his experience, and Gustavo has been divorced in the past in his life, and I don't know much about the rest of his relationships, but he's been divorced and he's living under a pretty difficult regime in Venezuela and with his family members. But their opportunities and their situation there has limited a lot in their life. So it becomes much more difficult to even pursue or move forward into a new reality or a new stage of life. And so this experience becomes all the more important, even just considering the circumstances from which he is coming. So he's finding that there is not only forgiveness and peace with mistakes made in past relationships, but there are opportunities to make those things whole and to experience them in what he referred to as this childlike love, which is ironically very much akin to what people experience in the out-of-body state and in near-death experiences as the unconditional love of God, because there is a childlike beauty to what we experience with the unconditional love of God as well. And so it's very important for us to recognize that these things are never lost. There is always the opportunity for the reconciliation, the bringing things back to fruition, and the understanding. Another aspect of his experience that I think is really important is he talks about the people who are on the outskirts, and they're not allowed in yet because of the fact that they do not recognize what the mistakes are that they've made, and they do not understand them. Those were two key words in Gustavo's experience. But that once they accept them and understand them, they are welcomed in. What does this show us? It shows us what I talk about a lot in my interviews and in the videos that we do, is that this process of purification is not optional. It's not something that you can just lay aside and say, okay, whatever. It's something that you have to embrace on a daily basis and be prepared to act upon. And acting upon, what does that mean? It's acting upon it is doing the actual work of the soul, actually looking more deeply into the things that you do not see that you are doing, the things that you do not recognize. And then when you recognize them, then it's taking the deeper thrust into, well, why are you doing it? And that becomes the painful part of the journey, because what you're going to do if you're following this honestly and trying to offer this as an experience for your soul to amend to further things, you will have to look at the vices that drive these mistakes. And of course, we're all uncomfortable with that. So, what's new? Same thing, different day, right? So we all have to then actually be very honest with ourselves, because that's the prerequisite. And here in Gustavo's experience, that's exactly what he is sharing and what he is seeing. He's seeing that this fear of the punishment isn't necessary, which is a beautiful, release for so many of us, because we fear that. We fear the punishment for our misdeeds, but we don't often look at the consequences of not doing the work, not doing the work. And, in everything that I speak about and in my books, we talk about the work of the soul. There is an actual task. There is a job that we are here to accomplish and do. And so what we're trying to recognize and offer is this opportunity then to see the things and then understand them. And so looks like we have quite a few people in the chat room. I'm just checking to see if we have any issues with getting into the chat room. We have people, watching live. Feel free to join in and come into the chat room and share your questions or thoughts about anything relating to out-of-body travel. It doesn't have to be about Gustavo's experience. So John has a question. Thank you, John. Marilynn, in your experiences in guiding souls into heaven, are there any that stand out that you would like to share? I'm going to go with my gut on that. The first thing that came to mind, because there's a lot that stand out. So very good question. But the one that, is, I'll never forget any of them, but this is one where All I have to do is think about the experience and bring it to mind, and the whole grand vista of the beautiful things that I saw comes back to my memory. And what happened in that experience was I was actually working on a soul, helping her in deliverance. And she had initially believed, and this is a beautiful story in terms of how it turned out. She believed that she might be possessed. She was on medications for psychosis. She was completely disabled, unable to have relationships. She was being tormented by something. She didn't know quite what. She thought maybe she needed to be exorcised. But she would end up in the hospital for this psychosis recurrently. And it was very difficult for her. She was living at home. She couldn't hold a job. She was with her parents, but she couldn't break free of whatever this was. And so we did deliverances on her. And then I had a beautiful mystical journey. And in this mystical journey, I was taken into what I'll call, for the sake of not having a name for it, the back doors of her soul. And in the back doors of her soul, there was this opening. And, she had a weakness. And this was a weakness related to mental health issues. But the mental health issues were greatly exacerbated by what was to be shown to me next. So she had this opening in her spirit that allowed for lost souls to come in. And literally, it was as if her house, the house of her soul, had been invaded by, was somewhere between 50 and 100 lost souls who had all congregated within and around her. And what happened in this case, these were souls that were troubled, and they had similar troubles. So they literally were attracted to one another by this magnetic impulse of compatibility. So once that door was open, it became magnetic, and these other souls would just naturally amend. And before she could even get a grasp on it, there were 50 to 100 lost souls working with her. Hey, Mysteries Productions, welcome on board. Glad you joined us. And so we were talking about these lost souls. So they all shared these similar contaminations. And so I wandered around what was presented to me in the mystical realm as a home, like the home of her soul. And I spoke with many of these souls, and I discovered what their misunderstandings and their contaminations were. And with many of them, I went through purification processes, casting things out of them, doing some, changing their perceptions that were false. But here is where it became so astounding and beautiful that it qualifies for what you're asking about, John, which is, one that stood out. So, here I am in this contaminated environment. Everything's dirty. Everything's corroded. Everything is, like a hoarder's den, just all of this contamination, not just the 50 to 100 souls, but all of the dirt, the debris, the chatter, it's all in there, So suddenly the angelic realm descends and calls to me to come outside the house, because they are preparing to deliver all of the souls in this house, which houses the soul of this young woman who had been so tormented. And again, she couldn't hold a job. She couldn't have relationships. She had psychosis. She was on medication for this. She would be hospitalized once a week for it. It was very bad. And she didn't know whether she was possessed or needed other kinds of help, or if it was just psychological. So we go outside, and literally in the heavens. The sky is black as night, the stars are out, but in the heavens, these huge seraphs, these seraphim, they were huge angels, like 15-foot tall angels made of pure white light. Pure white light. And they were tall and they were misty, and their wings would sway in the wind, but they were purely energy beings. They were astonishing. And I was directed then to take the souls who then filed out of the house, like in a line. And with each one, I spent a few minutes and spoke with them, understood. And, this is one of the things that goes back to Gustavo's experience, which is that it was important for the souls to recognize and understand in order to be admitted to heaven. And so this is what happened in this experience. I'll answer that question in just a moment, Andrew. Excellent question. So I'll read that and share. And so what we have then is each one is going through this. We're talking. I'm understanding where their contamination is, where their misunderstanding is. I am correcting them, making some energetic adjustments. And then, and it wasn't one angel, it was hordes of seraphim. So literally the skies were filled with these amazing angels. And with each soul, as they walked forward, there would be 10 to 20 that would come forward because they're ready to receive each of these souls to take them to heaven. And as soon as the soul was ready, they took their hand, and it was like a movement like this. Took their hand, and they flew up right into the arms of the seraphim. And I would see them be taken into heaven. And it was so beautiful because the joy, the smiles, the beaming, the infinite love and excitement of each one of them. And I went through this with every single one, cleared out that house. And every single one was taken by the seraphim into heaven. And when that was finished, I was instructed then to return to this home, which was representative of her soul. And there was a back door that needed to be sealed. And so we went through some of the deliverance procedures of the blessings and sealing it, closing it off, sealing it with the cross, with certain holy words that were given to me by the seraphim, and the instruction that this particular soul was not to seek anything in the out-of-body travel state or in that nature, psychic gifts or anything like that, because of this weakness that came from her mental health weakness. But her mental health issues were not as serious as they appeared, because what had happened was this weakness had created an actual contamination with these souls. So the removal of these souls was going to be literally life-altering, life-changing for her. So when I returned, I discussed all that with her and the important things about keeping that door shut. I talk in some interviews and say there are certain situations where people should not pursue out-of-body travel, and this would be a perfect example of one. And what was beautiful about this, besides all the obviousness of what I just shared, was that in the next 6 months to a year, her life completely changed. Everything was different from the next day forward. And within a year, she was living on her own. She was working. She was in a serious relationship, and she was planning to get married and have children. So she went from literally having no chance at life to having a beautiful life. And so this is a beautiful example of how the heavens reach down and assist us in our purification. It's not just for special people or somebody who has an unusual gift. It's for everyone. And this is how God is reaching. And Gustavo's experience that we talked about really also emphasizes that, because he was going through a difficult time. He's been struggling with some depression. And he has this beautiful experience we talked about. Thank you, Andy. And let me read your question. And yeah, it is an awesome story, and I appreciate you seeing that. It was an amazing experience. And so let's see what you're asking. When you say do the work, can you give a brief outline as to how to do the work? I assume that involves prayer, spiritual reading. Do you recommend any particular texts to read? Yes. So doing the work is really the self-examination, the examination of the soul that comes from the hard labor of love, of seeking to know what is true to God rather than what is true to each of us individually. Each one of us individually is going to view reality through the eyes of what we believe to be true. And that includes our habits, our vices, our virtues. And so there is always discoloration on that. And this is why I recommend the study of mystical theology, because mystical theology is the science of the soul. And this is the way and the manner in which we can identify these things within us that we would not otherwise see. I'm just going to run over here and grab one of these mystical theology texts, and I want to give you an example of how that works. Let me just grab it. So I am taking here The Spiritual Life by Father Adolf Tanqueray. I'm just going to open to a random page here, so we're going to hope that this works out. Okay. So we are going to just take this random page opening. But, you know, you were talking about prayer and spiritual reading. It's also meditation. So, you know, I'm always recommending to people, like, your basic practice includes prayer, talking to God, meditation, listening to God. Spiritual reading is part of the work of the soul, because this is how we cultivate. It's like pruning a tree, you know. When we read mystical theology, it helps us to prune our vices, to prune back our disillusionments, our areas of not being in agreement with the truth of God. So, for instance, here's just a random one. Prayer is and will ever remain the most effective means of exercising zeal. What a contrast is offered in this regard between the saintly priest and the commonplace priest. The former prays habitually and constantly for his very actions, done for God, constitute a real prayer. He does nothing, he does not even give a word of counsel, without acknowledging his helplessness and begging God to make up for it by his grace. God, quote, who giveth grace to the humble, unquote, grants it to him in abundance, and his ministry brings forth fruit. The imperfect priest prays little and prays poorly, and for this reason, his ministry remains barren. Hi, Frank, welcome. And we will answer your question next. So when we're talking about this, you can read this from the context of being just a regular person. You don't have to be a priest. And so we see that when we pray well, we will bear more fruit. Our spiritual life will bear more fruit. We will have more of an ability and openness to receive from the Holy Spirit for those purification types of events that have to occur. But, you know, the work of the purification and mystical theology is the identification. And even in Gustavo's experience, he spoke specifically of the souls that were outside of heaven could not come in until they identified what it was they were doing, and then they had to understand it. So that's very important. So here is an excellent one that I just pulled out that we're going to go to. We're kind of going with the spirit as we go here. So whichever way is adopted, the heart must be freed from its attachment to riches if it would take its flight towards God. This is what Bossuet urges. Bossuet was a great mystical theologian that is quoted often in mystical theology. Quote, "Happy they who in the lowly seclusion of God's house delight in the bareness of their narrow cells, in the beggarly appointments that satisfy their wants in this earthly existence, a shadow of death, there to gaze solely upon their weakness and the heavy, oppressing yoke of sin." Hello, MT. Welcome to our live stream. Thank you for joining us. Happy those consecrated who no longer seek to appear before the world and who would fain hide themselves from their own eyes beneath the sacred veil that shrouds their form. Blessed that sweet restraint wherewith we guard our eyes, lest they light upon vain things. The while we say with David, "Turn away mine eyes that they may not behold vanity." Happy those who, living in the world according to their state of life, remain undefiled and unfettered. Those who can say with Queen Esther, "Thou knowest, O Lord, how I scorn this emblem of pride." She was referring to the crown because she was the queen. "How I abhor the glory of the wicked and ungodly. How thy handmaid hath never rejoiced save in thee, O Lord God of Israel." And then even just moving just a bit forward, Bossuet also says, pride is a profound depravity. It is the worship of self. Man becomes his own God through excessive self-love, unquote. Forgetful that God is his first beginning and his last end, he overrates himself. He considers himself the sovereign Lord and master of those qualities, real or imaginary, which he possesses without referring them to God. From this arises that spirit of independence, of self-sufficiency that finally brings man to renounce allegiance to God and his representatives on earth. Hence also that egotism which prompts him to do everything for self as though he were himself his last end. That vain complacency in his own excellence as though God were not its source. That conceit in his good works as though they were not above all the result of God's action on his very soul. Hence again, the tendency to exaggerate the good qualities he possesses and to attribute to himself others that he lacks. Hence, too, the disposition to prefer self to others and at times, like the Pharisee, to despise others. This pride is accompanied by vanity, which seeks inordinately the esteem, the approbation, and the praise of men. It is called vainglory, for as Bossuet points out, quote, "If it be but an empty or undeserved applause, what an absurdity to delight in it. If it be genuine, why the further folly of rejoicing less at truth than at the tribute paid to truth? A paradox indeed that one should be more solicitous for the esteem of men than for virtue itself. That man should find cause for greater humiliation in a blunder committed in the sight of all than in a real fault committed in secret." I think all of us can feel the pruning, even just from this small excerpt from The Spiritual Life by Father Adolf Tanqueray, my favorite work on mystical theology, but I have a whole shelf of favorites over here. But this gives you an example. So this is, part of that work. But that work is that daily practice, which includes the prayer, which was spoken of in the earlier quotation, the meditation, and the spiritual reading. St. Padre Pio said, you cannot progress in the spiritual life without daily spiritual reading. So let me catch up here. Recommended prayers are Rosary and Divine Mercy, and also personal prayers to God. Those prayers are excellent. I always recommend the Holy Mass as well. Having a conversation with God is definitely something that I encourage in the practice of seeking out-of-body travel and mystical experiences. Let me back up there. Frank, is out-of-body experience kind of like lucid dreaming? Lucid dreaming can be similar to out-of-body experiences, but it is not the same. An out-of-body experience is a fully conscious separation of the spirit from the body itself. So this is not an experience that your mind will be creating in your sleep. It is an experience that's fully conscious and separate from the body. The powerfulness of it is profoundly enhanced. You're dealing with the vibrational state. You're dealing with the descent of the unconditional love of God, the mind of God, all of these other things. And so lucid dreaming is very much an important aspect of the spiritual life. I definitely recommend that people journal their dreams. I also talk about something I call spiritual dreams, which can happen with lucid dreaming as well, where you will have experiences wherein you are being given instruction and being directed and taught. And those are extremely important. And we don't want to in any way not understand their importance simply because they may not be a fully conscious out-of-body experience. Those spiritual dreams are profoundly important and a very directional compass point in the mystical life. We receive a lot of direction through that. This purification journey comes a great deal through that. We can receive literally in a spiritual dream or an out-of-body experience instruction that literally pinpoints us right where we need to be working on in our soul. And what often happens over time is sometimes people will forget that they were pinpointed. They were given this exact direction of this is exactly what you need to look at, what you need to root out. And it's important not to forget those, because those are graces of God. And when you receive those, that's when you want to put in the work to root it out and to do the work to actually change and alter that thrust within your soul. Just recognizing it, but refusing to change it is not going to bode well for progress. You have to not just recognize it, you have to, as Gustavo's experience spoke of, understand it and then actually alter the way that you are operating, the way that you are existing, to come into accord with God's will in that regard rather than your own. And so, yes, out-of-body experiences there's a similarity, but they are a very different experience. And so we have out-of-body experiences, which are this powerful, totally conscious, amazing thing. We have the lucid dreaming, which can be instructive. And we have spiritual dreams, which are going to be the things that are very obviously messages from above, from heaven to us, giving us direction in our path, in our life, oftentimes in the very aspects that we're discussing, which is what exactly is it that's holding me back? What are my vices? What are my fetters? What is it that I do not see in myself that I need to alter and change? Recognizing first and then altering and changing. So Okay, so John, so recommended prayers, the rosary, the divine mercy, personal prayers to God. Every faith has their own prayers. So whatever your faith might be, if you're Hindu, Gayatri mantras, if you're Buddhist, Om Mani Padme Hum, there's practices in every faith um, that you can utilize. So whatever is your direction, your path, utilize the prayers of that path, but also make sure that you are having a conversation with God. So John has a question. Have you experienced guiding souls who have passed on, who were convinced that they were heaven bound, but were not permitted entry? If so, what were the principal obstacles to their admission to heaven? I have experienced that. And the principal obstacles, good question. Excellent question, John. Um, uh, what you run into more, ironically, excuse me, is souls who are convinced they're not destined for heaven. So I would say that that's actually something you run into more. We probably are surprised by how many of us don't believe we're worthy. And Gustavo mentioned in his experience as well that, he doesn't think he's worthy, but there he was in heaven, And so I run into that more. And this is because people are not recognizing the divine and eminent mercy of God, and that the reason that God gives us for being here on earth is for this progression. God does not wish us not to progress. He doesn't wish for our failure. He wishes to see us utilize the gifts given us and to become all that we are capable of becoming. So in terms of the principal obstacles to the admission, by the time I get to the souls that are in that space, who really thought they were heaven bound and weren't, they have often already been informed that they're not going there. So the dialogue changes a lot to, can you help us? Can you help us? And so that would be what you're more likely to see. Now, the principal obstacles, there's so many, but the biggest one, especially for a soul, and we do see this where there are souls who believe that they're just, in their own inherent goodness, which is, what this reading was about. Don't overestimate your own inherent goodness. Whatever goodness we have comes from God. And this is the humility that we all must eventually come to in the path of purification. So what you'll see mostly is the pride of that. There is a great deal of pride in that assumption. So when you're dealing with a soul like that, it's the pride of that. But I don't understand. I did this, and this, and this. And then, the focus is quickly changed to whatever the primary faults might be. And in many cases, there may be souls who are not necessarily going into a heavenly sphere right off the bat, but they are not prohibited from reaching that eventually. So, you may be introducing them into various purgatorial realms where they will go through a lot of instruction in a lot of different things. I would say, in regards to what is the most prominent in that regard, the most prominent place you're sending souls to who may have believed they were heaven bound is the chaos realm. And this is, there are many chaos realms. There's not just one. But these are purgatories where people are just busy, noisy, circling. And there's noise and people and souls everywhere. Sometimes it's like a carnival. Sometimes just noise, just constant activity, pointless, constant activity. These are the chaos realms. And so those are the most commonplace that when I'm called in to help a soul who's crossed over, their first step and stop is often a chaos realm. But after that, it will get even more specific, So everything is very specific. There are souls who may have committed suicide, who they have a completely different round of purifications to undergo than souls who may have been caught up in greed and lust and vanity, pride, avarice. There are specific places for all of these. And so whatever principal faults that you can imagine, those are the things that we run into with people. Ironically, vanity and greed are also among the top. There is a misnomer with souls that if they have managed to achieve something in this life, whether it's with their goods or their property or their money or their appearance or their station in life, they believe that somehow that will transfer when they cross over, but they don't recognize that this is not necessarily a good thing. Now, some people may have those types of gifts in this life, and it may be a completely different thrust when they cross over if they have utilized it differently. However, for those who are utilizing it for this self-glorification, this vanity, this greed, this putting ourselves before all others kind of approach, those ones will be kind of taken off guard by the fact that their status does change immediately at death. Whatever your, St. Alphonsus Liguori speaks of this really well in his masterful, classic piece from his ascetical works, Preparation for Death. The king and the queen are buried, 6 feet under, just like the pauper or the slave. Death is a great equalizer. And so I'd say the hardest one for people to deal with is pride. And then, pride goeth before all falls. And so underneath that window, we have, all these other vices that come of it. So pride is like the top point. And then below it, you have vanities, greeds, lusts, avarice, and then they come and manifest in different ways. And I think that can help you to understand when you go in to assist a soul in the afterlife, you experience this incoming infusion of the Holy Spirit, which informs you and lets you know that you are dealing with these particular issues. So you become informed of the energetic truth of that soul. So it'll begin with, okay, so we're dealing with pride and vanity. We're dealing with greed and vanity. Death is the great equalizer. Yes, I love it too. And, St. Alphonsus Liguori really, really lays it out for us best. Ironically, in the Buddhist path, there's also, I think it might be Kendragamon's Sutra, which is specifically on the meditation on death. And in the Buddhist tradition, they would actually have the monks go to the graveyard. And back in the day when those texts were actually written, in the graveyard, there would be a series of both buried and unburied bodies. And they would do a meditation on the different stages of decomposition. They would go to the graveyard. They would talk about the meditations on just the skeleton, the meditations on the maggot, the meditations on the corruption and the stench, the different levels of the the end of this bodily life on earth. And they would do it. I mean, they were pretty radical in the way that they would do these meditations. But the purpose of it was to bring the perspective back that we are all subject to death. We must all die. And what does that mean? And there is nothing more powerful, literally, than the meditation on death and recognizing what that means for each of us individually. And that's why it's common in, both the Buddhist monastic traditions and the Catholic monastic tradition. Meditation on death is considered one of the spiritual practices. It's one of the things that they have you do pretty much first. It's one of the first practices. So going back to Andrew's question, that would also be a practice that you can definitely add to your daily, daily thoughts and things. And so, yes. So our great equalizer. Thank you, John. We have a super chat. Woohoo! Again, for those of you who don't know what super chats are, it's an opportunity for you to have your thoughts featured, but also to share and help us out with the foundation and our work. And so, John, thank you so much for your $10 super chat. Really appreciate that. Really helps us, And again, just a reminder to everyone, you can become a member here for as low as $1.99 a month. And there are several levels. There's 5 different levels of membership you can have. And you can have spiritual counseling with the highest level there. And so you may want to consider looking at that. And this is one of the ways you can support what we do. So let's talk about what John has to say. Those experiences and explanations were very helpful. The souls who were convinced that they were not worthy of heaven was especially hopeful. Thank you. You're welcome, John. Yes. It's funny. We don't realize just how much we are alike. I say this in so many different interviews, but yes, that is what I see. I see that a lot. Souls who do not feel worthy to enter heaven. And so there's a lot of us who do realize, I don't know that I'll ever be worthy, but there is a spiritual realization in that humility. And going back to Gustavo's experience, that's partly what he's talking about, is this ability to humble ourselves, recognize our wrongdoing, have a sincere and true willingness to understand it. And as in Gustavo's experience, he said, we were immediately able to allow them into the heavenly spheres once they understood it as well. So there is this constant creation, continuing to create, this constant trying to assist souls to reach a higher understanding. We just have to listen. We have to listen. We have to hear what is being shared with us, what is being told to us through the experiences we receive. And sometimes we might receive something, it seems like a subtle thing. We may even have an experience where for a day or two, we're really bummed out about it because something is pointed out to us that is either a minor or a very serious and grave fault that we have. But what we need to recall is a few things. First of all, that we want to remember this and we want to meditate on this. We want to do that work, which is the recognizing it, understanding it, and altering it. But what we also want to do is recognize what a profound grace that is. We don't remember that when the Lord God Almighty descends and graces us with an experience which literally points out to us something that we would not see ourselves in a million years, which is how it is, because unfortunately we're all human beings and we're kind of slow. But when God graces us and literally descends and shows us exactly what we are doing wrong, we want to remember that's a profound grace. And that's also a sign of great trust that God is giving us, in that he is allowing his attention to come to us for this to be pointed out to us, because he believes we will respond and do something with it, do something productive and useful with it. So it's a sign of predilection when we begin to be corrected. It's not a sign of how much we suck or how much we are messing up and just failing at everything. It's a sign that God has taken note that we have entered into a sphere where he believes we may actually benefit from being corrected. We may actually use it for its greatest expression, which is recognition. Yes, this is the mistake I'm making. Then taking it to understanding. Why am I doing it? Why am I doing it? And having that honest look at the vices and the ulterior motives or the self-serving prides that we have that might be underneath it, being very honest about it, because that's where the understanding comes in. Again, Gustavo's experience. And that's when we are allowing ourselves to then attain admission into the heavenly spheres, because we are just accepting responsibility. And Andrew says, Marilynn, your words are medicine for our souls. Thank you. You're very welcome. Thank you for the great questions too. I mean, it's really excellent to point out to people, that mystical theology is actually what it is. A lot of people don't know what that is. But as you read texts on mystical theology, you will literally feel yourself being pruned. It's just part of that process. And that is what purification is. We're pruning our souls so that we can grow out like a tree. I'm a gardener, and I have an orchard back there. When you prune your trees back, you're not doing it because you want to hurt them. You're doing it because you know which direction they need to grow. They need to grow in a particular way so that they can bear more fruit. That is exactly what God is doing to us when he corrects us. And when we take the time and effort, we make that effort to also engage in our own personal purification journey, which includes that spiritual reading, which is allowing for these other sources that have been brought in by the Holy Spirit to direct and guide us. Because literally what these will do, I'm talking here about the spiritual life and other texts like this on mystical theology, it will go through the vices and the virtues in such detail that you will begin to recognize these things without even requiring a mystical experience to do so. That is the beauty of it. Because what we are doing is recognizing and honoring the fact that we can't expect God to, reveal everything to us personally. That is an unrealistic expectation. That is why we access the ancient sacred texts and the great holy writings that God has inspired throughout the ages to also assist in our purification. Because what we're saying is, we respect your time, God. We respect that you have brought about monumental efforts in many souls that will help us to do these things. And the irony is that when we do that work on the ground, we usually actually induce more mystical experiences just by the very nature of entering into that purification and that self-examination. So all very important things. And I really appreciate all of you coming and joining me for this. And I appreciate Gustavo from the Aponte family in Venezuela for giving me permission to share his beautiful experience and giving us this opportunity to also then kind of pull out all the gold in the experience that he had, and how it helps all of us to kind of understand heaven and understand God better. And so thank you all for coming. And again, consider, if you are not a member already, consider becoming a member. You can just hit the join button and look at the options. And again, you look at the different perks, but you're also just making it possible for us to continue our work. And we are very grateful for that. So thank you all. Thank you to all our members who are already doing this. We are very grateful for your help. And thank you so much, MT. She says, thank you for another great lesson. And thank you so much for coming and joining us and being a part of it. Thank you, Mysteries Productions, and Andrew and Frank and John. And I'm trying to make sure I don't miss anybody in here. I know we have some others in here that are not utilizing the chat. So I thank all of you for joining us. Very grateful to have all of you. John says, you are always very much appreciated. Heaven sent. Thank you, John. That's very kind, very appreciated. And so until next time, thank you all for coming. And I hope this was as helpful for all of you as it was for me. I found Gustavo's experience to be very edifying and, just as much as it is interesting and just beautiful as well. So thank you for joining. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.